There's a growing awareness of the potential for a large earthquake in the Pacific Northwest, all the way from northern California to southern Canada. Cascadia subduction zone is about 600 miles long. And recent evidence over the last couple of decades shows that that has been the source of some very large earthquakes, not very frequent, maybe every 250 to 350 years apart. But the last one was in the year 1700. It was over a magnitude 8.5. So the potential for a large earthquake is something that we should not just be aware of. We should also recognize that we will be much better off during and after that earthquake if we're prepared.
If you're not familiar with the fact that we have the potential for an earthquake larger than California will ever experience, an earthquake that really defies description, then you're going to be pretty surprised today. You know, we live in one of the most beautiful places on Earth. We're blessed that way. But it's also an incredibly dynamic landscape. And the same geologic forces that have created this beautiful landscape also give us some pretty serious natural hazards. Our coastline, where the largest ocean in the world meets the North American continent. It's a beautiful place, but it's not without its own hazards, as anybody who lives at the coast will know. We forget sometimes that we live within an active volcanic mountain range. In fact, over the last 4,000 years, there have been 57 major eruptions in the Cascades. There's certainly a possibility that we will see an eruption from one of these great Cascade volcanoes at some point, maybe in our lifetimes. In fact, just 30 years ago or so, the eruption of Mount St. Helens woke the whole Pacific Northwest up to the potential of these great eruptions. The eruption of Mount St. Helens was also one of the first indications that geologic forces that have created our beautiful dynamic landscape also had the potential to create massive earthquakes. Other geologic discoveries soon followed, including an ancient western red cedar forest discovered in the mid-1980s that had died suddenly. Scientists like Dr. Brian Atwater realized that probably the death of this great ghost forest was the result of a great earthquake at some point in our past, and in fact tree ring samples indicated that it must have happened sometime around 1699 to 1700. He and other researchers also began looking in tidal marshes up and down the Pacific Northwest coast, and what they found was a thin layer of tsunami sand, sandwiched in between topsoils, which indicated that massive earthquakes that generated tsunamis had happened in the past. In fact, as geologists dug down into the tidal marshes, they found tsunami sands in a layer cake over and over and over, which indicated that these great earthquakes had happened many times in the last few thousand years, with the last one dating to January 26th, 1700.
We are overdue. It's what scientists call a seismic gap, where you expect periodic earthquakes that are relatively regular in timing. We are overdue. And it's because we have a collision zone between two continents. And when you have collisions, the pressure builds up more before the rocks break, which means the earthquake that results tends to be larger.
Here's a satellite image of the Northwest. There we are in Oregon, and here is the Juan de Fuca Plate, a tiny remnant of a very ancient tectonic plate, an oceanic plate that pushes against North America as North America moves west at about an inch a year. So where these two tectonic plates meet and are pushing against each other, that creates a 600-mile-long earthquake fault called the Cascadia subduction zone. The Juan de Fuca Plate is actually diving under North America in a process called subduction. Here's where it gets kind of hard to believe. We know that in the last 10,000 years, there have been 20 magnitude 9 plus earthquakes along this 600-mile-long earthquake fault that sits about 75 miles off our coast. We also know now from recent geologic evidence that there have been another 20 earthquakes along the southern portion of the 600-mile-long earthquake fault over the last 10,000 years. So the bottom 300 miles of the earthquake fault from Northern California to about offshore Florence or Newport have ruptured 20 times over the last 10,000 years. That means that over the last 10,000 years, there have been 40 great subduction zone earthquakes, magnitude 8 or greater. If you average that out, that's about once every 250 years. The last of these great earthquakes was 310 years ago. Here's another way to look at it. The large red lines are magnitude 9 plus earthquakes. The smaller red lines are magnitude 8 to 9 earthquakes. As we march through time, you can see that these earthquakes happen on a pretty regular basis. Sometimes there's small clusters, sometimes there's a few hundred years apart. The last 1,000 years, we've had 4 magnitude 8.5 to 9 plus earthquakes along the Cascadia subduction zone, about 75 miles off the coast. We know in looking at these 40 events over the last 10,000 years that 75% of these earthquakes have occurred less than 310 years apart. This certainly suggests that we're within the window to get one of these great Cascadia earthquakes at any time.
300 years of plate motion being released in 4 or 5 minutes. That's going to be a rather large earthquake, particularly at the coast and offshore. Tsunamis is a fear for Oregon and Washington. But for us, we won't have much infrastructure left.
The good thing is you can prepare for one of these types of earthquakes. The bad news is it's the infrastructure that suffers. Roads, bridges, power, water, sewer, natural gas, communications. These are the things that take a big hit in these types of big earthquakes. We know that this earthquake, when it happens, will directly affect 13 million plus people. That's everybody from Northern California up through southern British Columbia. Everybody west of the Cascades, they're going to get the hell shaken out of them. If there are 13 million people affected by this earthquake, it may take a while for help to arrive. That's why it's so important to be prepared. Once again, these are very survivable earthquakes, but unless you're prepared, you end up becoming a victim.
It's more than just duck, cover, and hold while it's shaking. It's preparation on storing not just 72 hours, but maybe weeks worth of food, water, medication, whistle, you name it. The things you take for granted now when there's electricity, there won't be any electricity and there won't be any phones. So how are you going to survive yourself and your family and your neighbors?
We know that there's going to be a lot of damage to infrastructure. In 2009, ODOT did a study that looked at bridges that would be damaged in a magnitude 9 earthquake. Especially the big bridges along Highway 101 are going to be damaged or destroyed. Highway 101 will cease to exist as a transportation corridor. I-5 will suffer damage to the point where I-5 will cease to exist as a transportation corridor. When I say help is not going to arrive quickly, I mean it's going to be tough for first responders to get over the mountains, to move on Highway 101, and until I-5 is reopened, there's no help coming. You're literally on your own.
The Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, as well as the Department of Emergency Management, their initial goal is to get people aware of the situation, but not so much that they simply wring their hands or give up, because it is survivable. And having emergency supplies at home and discussions with your family and neighbors will make a huge difference. And that way it'll take the pressure off of first responders if various neighborhoods can come together and take care of themselves.